Welcome to Code Jumper. This is lesson 6 about loops. The objectives of this lesson are that students will understand that the loop command in computer programs is a repetition, and they'll learn how to create programs using the loop command. The expected outcomes are that all students will be able to explain what a loop command is and why we use it. Most students can recreate a programming sequence using a loop command, and some students will be able to create an original sequence requiring a loop command. Key vocabulary is the word loop, which is a way to organize commands in a computer program so that they repeat a sequence of instructions for a desired number of times. In the case of the Code Jumper loop pod, the loop will continue to repeat the sequence a set number of times. Repetition is also a key vocabulary word. It means repeating a set of commands in a computer program using a loop. The Unplugged activity has the objective to introduce the students to the concept of a loop and how it can be modified to repeat a series of steps a required number of times. Students will need some materials. They'll need their computer science journals, a whiteboard, like maybe one per group, and a marker to write with, a computer, and determine what kinds of materials are needed for your classroom. If whiteboards are not appropriate, choose another method. In small groups, students are going to work together to create a list of things that they do that are repetitious, or things that they do multiple times in a row. For example, on the screen right now, setting the table, jumping rope, practicing a song on the piano, working on math problems, and my personal favorite, folding laundry. It happens over and over and over again. These things in life that happen over and over again can get a little bit boring sometimes. That's where computers come in handy, because computers are very good at doing repetitive things, and computers don't get bored. In computer programming, repetitive tasks are called loops. When you use the loop command, it will repeat as many times as you tell it to repeat. The objective of the guided activity will be that students will identify commands that repeat and be introduced to the loop command and how to put the commands that need to be repeated inside of the loop. The vocabulary is the same, the word loop and repetition, and students are going to need their computer science journal and the loops code card, counting to 3 looped. In the first part of this guided activity, it's fun to ask students to think about and predict, or give it a try in their computer science journal, how they might get Code Jumper to play the numbers 1, 2, 3 a few times, 4 times in a row. In this part of the guided activity, we're going to ask students to write down and record in their computer science journals how they would solve this problem. How would they get Code Jumper to say the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 times in a row? Once they've written down their predictions, divide students into groups of 2 or 3 and have them pull out all of the play pods in their kits and the hub, and see if they can come up and recreate some of their ideas about how to get Code Jumper to say 1, 2, 3, 4 times in a row. Up on the screen right now is the loops code card counting to 3 looped, and so that is actually the answer. This is the sample program set up and run by you, and it shows the code at the bottom. Thread 1, numbers, loop 4 times, play 1 at 1 times speed, play 2 at 2 times at 1 time speed, play 3 at 1 time speed, end loop, end thread. And over on the right-hand side is an example photograph of, so that it shows the hub and then a play pod coming out of the thread. The play pod is connected to the loop pod. The loop pod has one play pod attached, and then the loop pod is connected back to the loop pod with the long cord. And then coming out of the other side of the loop pod is another play pod. At this point, it's important to make sure students understand how the loop pod works. So you might want to pause and do a little bit of a demonstration. The reason this picture is helpful for just demonstrating how the loop pod works is because coming out of the hub is a play pod, then the loop pod with its attached play pods, and then the program continues on after the loop pod. It's important for students to understand that the loop is just the part that's connected to the loop pod. The program can continue with other sounds that aren't necessarily part of the loop. It's also helpful at this point to help students recognize that creating the CodeJumper program in a straight line sometimes helps it make it easier to see exactly where the loop is or to feel where the loop is. When it's all curved and curly-cued around, it's harder to tell the straight main part of the program from the loop. So for this activity, you might consider having a longer, wider table or a space where students can really stretch it out so that where they have the loop itself drops down and clockwise around back to the loop pod. And it's just makes a separate circle with their fingers from the straight main portion of the program. So I'm going to switch back on my screen to my document camera on the right and CodeJumper on the left. Show you a little bit about the loop pod. I go back and forth whether it's fun to demonstrate this or have kids figure it out on their own, but the loop pod can be a little bit confusing. So you'll have to take it, play it by ear a little bit with your students and do what works best. But the loop pod right now, I have the hub connected to the short cord of the loop pod. The loop pod is the yellow dial. It has one yellow kind of flat and squatty dial, a short cord coming out of one side of it. The bottom of it has a very long cord, and then there are two notched ends, one kind of on the same side as the long cord and one notch that is exactly opposite of the short cord. When I plug it in, the app on the left side of my screen is a little bit grayed out. It says thread 1. I chose the numbers sound set. It says very faint, I can hardly read it. It says loop 3 times and loop, but it's very grayed out. And it isn't connected because the loop pod, while it is connected to 3 play pods, the play pods are not connected back properly. And this happens a lot with students. It takes them a while to figure out exactly how to connect properly. So if I push play at this time, you're going to hear something unusual. A burp. CodeJumper burps if there is an error and it can't complete the program. Not a bug, but an error in such a way that it actually can't run the program because the error is so large. So once I connect to this lower port in the loop pod, the one on the bottom side just next to the long cord, you'll hear the connect and the lines of code will appear. So the yellow loop 3 times is sort of bracing or surrounding the 3 lines of code inside of it, which are the 3 play pods. And so I'm going to actually set this up.
1, 4, 6, 8, 2, 7, 2, 3.
Okay, so I have my CodeJumper set up so that the first play pod will play 1, the second play pod will play 2, and I'm going around from the loop pod. I'm tracing the code around clockwise. So go from the hub to the loop pod down to the play pod on the clockwise side. 1, 2, 3 play pods, and then the long cord back to the loop pod. And then if this program were to continue, it would come out of the other side of the loop pod. So if I want to change the number of times that the loop is played, I'll turn the dial at the top.
3, 4, 5.
You can
4.
hear it's different than the sound set. The voice is different from the sound set because it's the kind of the code jumper voice, the same voice that you hear when you read the code aloud. So this is kind of the end result, but what you might want to try doing, and I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint because on it has the loops code card counting to 3 looped. Give them this and see if they can create it using just play pods. Turns out they probably don't have enough play pods in their kit, and so they're going to have to use the loop pod. After they have created their program, have them press the play and the stop button together on the hub and listen to the code read aloud and determine whether or not it matches the code card that they were given. Now that they're finished with that, they can create a program with a loop all on their own, just for fun. Have them create with any of the sound sets and explore how many times can sounds be played with the loop pod. What's the max number on Code Jumper of sounds that can be played using the loop pod? In the exploration activity, students will create a program with 8 play pods. Set the sounds on each pod and they'll run and trace the program. The vocabulary is the same, loop and repetition. And with this, they're going to use the exploration code card titled Percussion. So to start off on this exploration, I'm going to pull up my document camera on the right and the Code Jumper app on the left. And my document camera shows that in thread 2, from the hub of thread 2, there is a loop pod, and connected in the loop pod are 2 play pods that then connect to the long cord of the loop pod. On the app, you can see that the loop pod is connected 6 times. The 2 lines of code within the loop are play snare drum for 1 time speed and play hi-hat 2 for 1.5 times speed. Now, at this point, I will have set this up ahead of time so that students are not seeing the app or hearing the code read aloud or anything like that yet. And in fact, they can't even observe what I have on Code Jumper. I just want them to listen and use their ears. And then in their computer science journals, I'd like them to see if they can answer some of these questions that we're going to ask. So first I'll start by playing. So you can play the program and then ask them a few questions. First of all, does this program use a loop? How many times do the notes repeat? What's the order of the notes? And see if students can answer some of these questions in their computer science journal and possibly start creating a code card for this. This might be a little tricky because the 2 sounds are a little bit different, but it's a good prediction. And then give them Code Jumper and let them practice and see if they can recreate the same exploration code card, which is Percussion. Once students have recreated their own code card, they can listen to their program and then compare it to the program sample that you created at the beginning and see if they can debug from that. Ultimately, we want students to recognize that loops can be very useful in computer programming because it saves a lot of lines of code. And in Code Jumper, it saves a lot of extra pods, or in this case, extra play pods. And that's it for loops.